SI-1 for all hands full. Roger, SI-1, welcome home.
On July the 29th, 1945, the battlecruiser USS Indianapolis was en route to the Philippines from Guam. She was carrying nearly 1,200 crewmen. It was a calm night, the ship moving gently in the Pacific swells. Just after midnight on the 30th, she was struck by 2 Japanese torpedoes. The first detonated a fuel tank and the second hit the powder magazines. The ship was doomed and she sank in less than a quarter of an hour. 900 men managed to escape the burning, foundering ship. But with little time to launch life rafts, most men were forced to swim in the open water, perhaps aided by a life jacket. As horrific as this ordeal already was, the real tragedy was about to begin. By dawn, sharks had begun to attack. That first night, they attacked the easier prey. The men who had died from the ship's explosions are now floating lifeless on the water's surface. But for several days afterwards, the sharks continued to feed on the dwindling numbers of survivors. Pulled together for safety, the men defended the perimeters where the sharks attacked. On the 4th day, the survivors were spotted by a plane that radioed for help, and eventually the USS Doyle arrived on the scene. A mere 317 crewmen remained. And while most had died from dehydration or heat exhaustion, it is estimated that as many as 150 had been killed by sharks. The sinking of the USS Indianapolis would go down as the most notorious shark attack in history. But does this one tragic story justify the terror that many people feel when it comes to sharks? Well, let's look at some statistics. The International Shark Attack File, or ISAF, has recorded almost 3,000 shark attacks in the past 60 years or so, of which about 550 were fatal. On average, that's around 10 fatalities a year. As a source of mortality, that ranks less than attacks from the Nile crocodile, hippopotamus, snakes, and even dogs. In fact, if you live in the coastal US, data compiled by ISAF suggests that you're 75 times more likely to be killed by lightning than by a shark, and 1,000 times more likely to die when operating a bicycle. So why are sharks so particularly vilified? To some extent, the reputation seems justified, especially when one considers the story of the Indianapolis. But most shark attacks are credited to a very few species within the shark family. There are plenty of shark species with no records of unprovoked attacks. Of particular concern are the tiger, the bull, and the oceanic white-tip shark, as well as, of course, the famous great white shark, popularized by Peter Benchley's tale Jaws. All of these species have been known to attack humans unprovoked. But the remaining 500 or so other species would rather just swim away. Perhaps sharks have lousy public relation agents. Sharks look strange, intimidating, sinister. They appear to prowl. The shape of their teeth is the stuff of nightmares. And they are large, extremely fast, and very efficient predators. But one can identify the scary features of almost any apex predator in any ecosystem. In spite of the tragedy that sharks cause, and with all due respect to any victim of a shark attack who might be watching now, they're just trying to make a living as predators, albeit predators at the very top of their game. Sharks belong to a taxonomic group known as the Chondrichthyans, and it's this group that I want to focus on today. It is my hope that by the end of this lecture, you'll gain some respect, even admiration, for this amazing group of fish. Maybe you'll even begin to lament its demise. Because unlike the circumstances that apply to the Indianapolis, today it is the sharks that are in trouble, and we are the problem. Chondrichthyans can be divided into 2 groups. First, there are the elasmobranchi, a group that includes the sharks, the skates, the rays, and the sawfish. And then we have the holocephali, or chimeras, which are a group of deep-sea living fishes. Today, we're going to stick with the elasmobranchs, an ancient order that dates back almost 450 million years. Now, elasmobranchs can be broken down even further. One group, the Selachii, contain all the modern sharks, while a second group, the Batoidea, contains the rays, the skates, and the sawfish. As chondrichthyans, all elasmobranchs are also chordates. Being a chordate means having certain characteristics which would be useful to review here. First of all, chordates possess a notochord at some point during their life history, a back-stiffening rod that supports the body form. Actually, chondrichthyans only possess a notochord during their embryonic phase. As the embryo develops, the notochord is replaced by a cartilaginous vertebral column. Cartilage is a tissue similar to bone, but less rigid and more flexible. However, it still retains sufficient rigidity for it to serve as a skeletal function. And because they use cartilage rather than bone for an internal skeleton, we often refer to sharks, skates, and rays as the cartilaginous fish. All chordates possess pharyngeal gills, at least in the embryonic phase. In the chondrichthyans, these are maintained in the juvenile and adult forms as a way of exchanging respiratory gases with surrounding water. These organs allow them to extract oxygen from the water and dump unwanted carbon dioxide, a byproduct of respiration. In the bony fish, the gills are protected by a gill flap or operculum. However, chondrichthyan gills lack this protection. In many species, especially bottom dwellers, water enters in through a small pore behind the eye called the spiracle. This helps the animal pull in clean water rather than breathing in muddy water from the underslung mouth. Pelagic sharks living in the open water column do not need this adaptation, and so it is minimized. Some sharks, such as the whale shark, are incapable of pumping water over the gills, as most bony fish can. So, in order to have access to fresh, oxygenated water, they must constantly swim, constantly pushing water over the gills in the same way that air flows through a jet turbine. If these species stop swimming, then they start to act as if drugged because of the lack of oxygen in their circulatory system. While we're up at the head end, let's not forget that it was the foremost of the gill arches that gave rise to the jaws in the prehistoric fish. And it's perhaps by their jaws that sharks are best known, one famous literary great white shark taking on that very name. Compared to the rest of the cartilaginous skeleton, the jaws have been specially strengthened through calcification. However, the teeth are not embedded in the jaw as they are in land vertebrates. Instead, they are fixed in the gum tissue. If ripped out, which frequently happens, they're replaced by further rows of teeth. As one might expect, most shark teeth are razor sharp, although, as with all toothed animal species, the morphology of the tooth reflects the diet that they consume. For example, the teeth of the great white shark are flattened like a chisel, serrated and pointed, allowing the shark to rip into flesh and then cut through it as it whips its head from side to side. This makes for a messy wound, and a shark victim often bleeds to death. I vividly remember, as a marine mammologist, being called out to retrieve a harbour porpoise carcass from a local town beach. It was easy to determine cause of death. This normally 1.5 metre animal was only 3/4 of a metre in length because it was missing its second half. A shark, likely a great white, had bitten the animal clean in two. The zigzagged, ragged wound was extremely obvious and a clear diagnostic of a shark attack. While the 6-metre great white is notorious as a predator, perhaps the fiercest of all sharks was an animal that is no longer with us. Carcharocles megalodon, or just megalodon for short, grew a massive 18 meters, like a modern-day great white on steroids. Its teeth were the size of human hands, and the mouth was so large you could have driven a motorcycle through it with room to spare. The more timid of us are probably glad that this predator no longer roams the ocean. I'm not so sure. What a magnificent animal this must have been, at 3 times the size of the largest current-day shark predator. But you don't have to be large to have a nasty bite. Consider the cookie cutter shark, a parasitic dogfish whose teeth are highly modified to create a saw-like ridge that extends around the mouth. In feeding, the shark attaches its mouth to the surface of a typically much larger prey and carves out this disc-shaped chunk of flesh, leaving a very characteristic lesion and scar pattern. I have often responded to marine mammal strandings and found these lesions on the surface of large whales such as finbacks or sperm whales. It looks really painful, especially when those wounds get infected. Interestingly, some chondrichthyans have chosen through natural selection and evolution a life of a filter feeder over predation. 4 species, the whale shark, the basking shark, the megamouth shark, and the manta ray, feed exclusively on plankton suspended in the water column. Similar to the baleen whales, feeding on tiny plankton does not seem to restrict the size of these animals. The largest basking shark ever caught was over 12 meters long, and the whale shark, the largest fish in existence, can perhaps reach 14 meters. The deep-dwelling megamouth grows to 5 meters in length, and the majestic manta ray can be 7 meters in width. Each of these species uses modified gill rakers to catch their prey, and the manta ray even has an extra set of modified fins around the mouth called cephalic fins, which help direct the flow of the water into the mouth and out of the gills. All of these species still have teeth, much reduced, and at this point, pretty much non-functional. In addition to a notochord and gills, the third quality of all chordates is a post-anal tail. In the chondrichthyans, this has become highly modified, and in the case of the sharks, it has become an extremely powerful propulsion unit that varies morphologically across species. In some cases, such as in the great white, the upper and the lower lobes of the tail fin approach similar proportions. In most species, however, the upper lobe is considerably larger than the lower lobe, a morphology known as heterocercal. In some species, this is carried to an extreme, such as, for example, in the thresher shark. Heterocercal caudal fins are thought to improve locomotive efficiency. It allows the swimming muscle from the trunk of the shark to attach to a greater length of tail, making the side-to-side motion far more efficient. Recall that chondrichthyans, unlike their cousins, the bony fish, do not possess a swim bladder, and therefore cannot regulate their buoyancy in the same way. Some species, sharks for example, address this issue in part by having large livers that contain buoyant oil. And when I say large, I mean large. In some cases, a shark's liver might account for 1/3 of the total animal's weight. However, most of the lift a shark needs comes from swimming and keeping those pectoral fins at a slight upward angle, creating an upthrust in much the same way an airplane wing creates lift when subjected to the flow of air. Most species of cartilaginous fish are somewhat dorso-ventrally flattened, giving them a squashed appearance in cross-section. This is carried to an extreme in the skates and the rays, which appear almost flat in cross-section. The large wings of a ray, in reality greatly modified pectoral fins, offer up a massive surface that can be used as a source of propulsion, and the ray's tail may or may not play a role in movement. By the way, the flattened appearance of a ray is not to be confused with bony flatfish, which are laterally flattened, and then they swim on their side, one eye migrating to the upper side of the fish during post-larval settlement. It's a wholly different type of morphological adaptation that results in a similar outcome. Evolutionists would call this a type of convergent evolution, whereby a bottom-dwelling lifestyle has caused the same morphological solution in 2 different evolutionary lines. Further proof, I suppose, that natural selection works. Cartilaginous fish also all have a particular kind of fish scale, referred to as a dermal denticle, sometimes called dermal teeth or placoid scales. You may have heard how shark skin is very rough, almost to the point where it can give you a nasty graze if a shark rubs up against you. This is because of the placoid scales. Their shape helps reduce hydrodynamic drag. The final characteristic that chondrichthyans share with other chordates is the dorsal hollow nerve cord. As chordates ourselves, we probably take nerves for granted. But if we consider what came before the vertebrates, in other words, in the more earlier and primitive invertebrates, we begin to realize the advantage of a highly developed nervous system. With its development, we can efficiently transmit neural signals in both directions. Thus, we can coordinate a rapid and intricate muscular response, allowing us to move rapidly in a highly maneuverable way, as a predator needs to do. We can also receive and coordinate an array of sensory information. Recall that most, though not all, chordates possess a cranium. Members of this clade are called craniates, and all elasmobranchs fall within this group. This is important because the cranium or skull can house a brain of significant mass, and that brain in turn can process complex sensory information and coordinate intricate body movements. Sharks are perhaps not known for their intelligence, no matter what the various Hollywood portrayals might make you believe. However, there is a good correlation between a predatory lifestyle and brain size. In essence, one needs a bigger brain to swim faster, more accurately, and to coordinate the intricacies of a prey capture. Chondrichthyans' sensory ecology is complex, highly adapted, and unique in its capacity. It is perhaps the reason why I love sharks so much. So let's take a few minutes to understand it better. A shark's ability to sense its environment is extraordinary. Shark vision appears to be actually quite good, though it's likely not as important as their other senses. The eyes are large to maximize light intake in the murky depths of the ocean. Most evidence suggests that sharks have monochromatic vision. In other words, they see in shades of one color. However, they're extremely good in detecting contrast, which is essential when hunting at night or in dark conditions. Some shark eyes possess nictitating membranes that close over the eye when the animal takes a bite. Why is this? Well, natural selection did not bless the shark with opposable thumbs or cutlery. So feeding is a violent affair, with the shark taking a large bite of its prey and then using the full strength of its body to thrash back and forth to rip out that chunk of flesh. No wonder it might want to protect its eyes. Sharks also have an excellent sense of smell and taste, two senses that we group together under the category of chemoreception. There is no doubt that one of the sensory cues the sharks of the Indianapolis tragedy were attracted to was the taste of blood in the water. Some species of shark can detect tastes at concentrations of 1 part per million or perhaps better. Think about this. That's one tiny drop of blood in 50 liters of water. The sense of hearing is tied closely to the sense of vibration, as both sound and vibrations are transmitted as pressure waves. In addition to ears, sharks also possess a lateral line organ, an organ seen in most aquatic vertebrates that evolved originally in water. It is a highly sensitive mechanical reception system that can detect minute vibrations in the water, say those produced by a swimming fish. The lateral line system runs the entire length of the shark's body, and it's positioned more or less mid-flank on both the left and the right-hand sides of the animal. It consists of a channel called the lateral line canal that runs just beneath the scales of the shark, but it's connected to open water through pores at regular distances. Projecting into the channel, one finds microscopic neuromasts, heavily innervated structures containing sensory hairs. The lateral line system works in a way that is actually very similar to the ear. Vibrations travel through water very efficiently because water is non-compressible. those vibrations end up stimulating the sensory hairs within those neuromasts, which then fire a nervous impulse to the brain. It differs from the ear in that it detects low mechanical vibrations far more effectively, while the ear is better at detecting a higher frequency sound. The combination of ears and the lateral line system creates a sensory array that can detect the thrashing of prey thousands of meters away. Again, think back to the Indianapolis, with the crew members flailing helplessly in the water. There's no doubt that those movements would have attracted sharks that could feel the vibrations propagating through the water. To round off this amazing set of sensory abilities, sharks can do one more thing that neither you or I can do. Sharks can detect electrical currents. This is a sensation that would be lost on you and me, as air cannot transmit electrical currents except in extremely high voltage situations, such as those within a lightning bolt. But water, especially salt water, transmits electricity very well, and a shark's prey emits an electromagnetic field that is quite detectable. This is because all physical movement involves electrical potentials that are responsible for the initiation of the contraction of muscle fibers. In fact, we now know that animals produce detectable electrical fields even when they're at rest. So just imagine the kind of field that a thrashing or panicked prey might emit. Of all the animals tested, sharks have proven to be the most sensitive to electromagnetic fields. And this is because of the thousands and thousands of electroreceptor organs contained in the head and the neck of the shark, known as the ampullae of Lorenzini. These ampullae are so sensitive that sharks might be capable of detecting an electrical current of 5/1 billionths of a volt. There might be an added benefit to the ability to detect an electromagnetic field. Fluid conductors, such as seawater, will induce an electrical field simply through their movement. Therefore, the ocean currents themselves might be creating electromagnetic fields that a shark might use for orientation during migration. In essence, the shark might have their own onboard compass. And here I am, still floundering with the operations manual for my GPS. Supporting the uniqueness of a shark's sensory system is the accompanying morphology. Perhaps one of nature's weirdest creations is the hammerhead shark. How did natural selection end up creating such a strangely shaped head? Actually, a hammerhead's head is broad for the same reason a radar boom is broad. Let's look at this more closely. If a sensory cue is detected more closely or more strongly on one side of the head rather than the other, then the shark knows that to find the source of that cue, it must turn in that direction. When attempting to home in on a cue, the shark might twist back and forth, scanning for a direction that it should travel. Being somewhat broad in girth, all elasmobranchs have good separation between the left and the right-hand sides of the lateral line organ, which, as we've seen, runs mid-flank along the entire length of the animal. The nostrils, or the nares of the animal, are also well separated, and the ampullae of Lorenzini are distributed across the entire snout. But in the hammerhead, the separation of the left and right nostril, as well as the distribution of electrosensors, is maximized. By creating a broad distance between those sensory organs, you can maximize detection, as well as the direction from which a sensory cue originates. So when one considers all these amazing sensory abilities in sum, it's no wonder you arrive at the consummate predator. Elasmobranchs, as ancient as they are, have managed to conquer pretty much every niche in the ocean using these tools. We find them in the neritic and in the open ocean habitat, distributed pelagically, demersally, and benthically in all but the deepest of water. With the exception of the filter-feeding group, they are all predators, feeding on prey as large as a marine mammal, such as a seal or a small dolphin, and as small as a crab or a mollusk. As predators, they don't have too much to worry about. In other words, they don't have to worry about being preyed on themselves. However, there are some notable examples of defense adaptations. My first example is the stingray. These batoids are of course known for their barbed stinger, a modified scale located about halfway down their tail. The venom it injects is very painful, but rarely fatal to humans unless the victim has a frail constitution or if the sting causes anaphylactic shock. Luckily, stingrays are very timid and will move away from an encroaching human if given plenty of warning. In a second example, rays in the order Torpetiniformes can produce an electrical pulse as strong as a 30 amp, 220 volt charge to warn away an approaching predator. This pulse can also be used to stun prey. Not surprising, these Torpetiniformes are also known as the electric rays, and the process by which they generate their electric pulse is fascinating. An electrical discharge is created by cells known as electrocytes, which are thought to be modified muscle cells. Changing the permeability of the cell membrane of an individual electrocyte causes a movement of ions, creating an electrical potential across the cell membrane. Electric rays have hundreds of these cells organized into an electric organ, and by coordinating the electrical potential in each of them in series, the charge is magnified. Humans have known about electric rays for some time. There's even evidence that Roman physicians used them as a cure for headaches and gout. Despite the power of a discharge from some of the larger electric rays, imagine dropping a live toaster into a bathtub, it has never been documented to cause a human death. Speaking of Romans, perhaps it's useful to consider our historical relationship with the elasmobranchs, a history that has dated back thousands of years. Some Aboriginal cultures, particularly those associated with the ocean, adopted sharks as gods. More recently, people have been mostly interested in this group as a source of food. A staggering number of sharks are killed each year as a part of a directed fishery and as bycatch. Collectively, this number reaches into the tens of millions. Rays and skates are also fished, but not to the same extent. As megavertebrates, elasmobranchs are highly valued in fish markets, and their wide distribution globally means that they are easy to find and catch. Similar to tuna, large sharks can be cut into steaks, whereas skates and smaller sharks, such as dogfish, provide a white-fleshed fillet that is easy to prepare. In fact, in the UK, dogfish is commonly used in fish and chips, although it is marketed as rock salmon or huss, because somehow that sounds a little bit better than eating dogfish. Most elasmobranch fisheries tell the same tale, one of overexploitation that will inevitably lead to commercial extinction. Management and regulation is an issue as many shark species are migratory. Few agreements exist between countries to jointly manage the populations. Although the United Nations Memorandum of Understanding on the Conservation of Migratory Sharks is an important, significant step forward. Perhaps the most heinous and unsustainable fishing practice anywhere is the shark finning industry. In this fishery, sharks are caught live. Their dorsal fin is then cut off, and the shark is then returned, bleeding but alive, back to the water. Of course, the animal soon dies because it can no longer swim correctly. Recall that many sharks must swim to keep oxygenated water flowing over their gills. And so a shark unable to swim will either suffocate or be taken by another predator. Shark finning is, point blank, cruel. And yet it occurs worldwide and is mostly unregulated. Why is this practice allowed to continue? Because the product, which is shark fin soup, is highly prized on the Asian market as a homeopathic means to improve sexual potency and lower cholesterol. However, in reality, there is no scientific data to support such claims. In fact, as apex predators, sharks tend to accumulate toxins such as mercury in their flesh. So eating them consistently over a lifetime may well be downright unhealthy. The tradition of eating shark fin soup goes back at least 1,000 years, and it's hard to fight tradition, especially when you're dealing with an animal with a reputation of a killer. A few countries have made the practice of finning illegal, and other countries ban the import of fins. But black markets persist, and shark populations suffer and decline. It is a sad tale, but unfortunately sharks are becoming just another example of an overexploited marine megavertebrate, all because they taste good. And they still also suffer the stigma of being killers, in spite the fact that in reality only a few species are known to have killed humans. The incident of the Indianapolis was indeed very tragic, but many forget that almost 3/4 of the loss in life over those 4 days was because of dehydration and heat stroke. No fault of the sharks. Most sharks are benign and are actually scared of us. We ought to admire them for being incredible predators with amazing abilities. But instead, the media tends to sensationalize stories of shark attacks, and this only reinforces that killer reputation. Is there any light at the end of the tunnel here? Perhaps so. The message is slowly getting out to those who are willing to listen. Documentaries these days focus less on the reputation of sharks as killers and place greater emphasis on debunking myths about them. Meanwhile, ecotourism is increasing our exposure to these animals, helping create safe interaction with a range of species. One can hang out with hammerheads, swim with stingrays, mingle with manta rays, and worship whale sharks. There are even programs that help you find a great white in your own personalized shark cage, in case you look good to eat. In my neck of the woods, it's common to see basking sharks from the local whale watch boats. Their sheer size never ceases to amaze the onlooking passengers. So, if I were a fish, yes, I'd be pretty intimidated by a shark. I'd have good reason, as they would be at the top of my food chain. But as a human, I am less worried. Sharks actually have far better reasons to be more worried about us.